Hello everyone. This is part 2 of a series for adding a new component in Octant. This is specifically for the timeline component, where last time we talked about the machinery that generates this JSON blob, and now we're going to see how we'll pass this to Angular to ultimately end up with something that looks like this. All right. So the first thing we'll need to do is to actually set up the same definition that we did for the struct fields that were set up last time. So this is going to be done in web, source, and then app. And then now we see modules. We want the shared module. And then from here, we're going to see models, and we're going to be interested specifically in content.ts, and this has a bunch of interfaces for a lot of these various components that we have already. And I'm going to split right and make this full screen to show what this looks like side by side. So we're here, and we're going to look for the timestamp view, and we are going to create a new interface for timeline view extends view. And we see a view is going to need a config, and we'll handle the metadata somewhere else. So we'll do config. And a config should consist of steps, as we see here, and whether or not it's vertical. So let's do steps. That's going to be timeline step, and vertical, and that's a boolean. Semicolon, and let's export interface timeline step. Cool. So a step contains 4 things: state, header, title, description. All of those are strings, so do that. String, header, string, title, string, description, string. Cool. And something we can already kind of notice here is that the header and a title could get somewhat confusing, right? It's going to be hard to remember which one belongs on top and which one's on the bottom of the icon. So this will be something that will require good documentation. Okay, so now we have the interface. The next thing we need to do is to create the place where this component actually lives. So let's go back to our components. We'll go to presentation. We see a bunch of folders for essentially components that are used for plugins and available publicly. We're going to create a new folder, and we'll call it timeline. And here we're going to create 4 new files: timeline.component.html. Then we want another one, timeline.component.ts. And then we'll need one for testing, component.spec.ts, and one more for CSS. So we'll do timeline.component.sass. All right, so now we have all 4 of these. We can go ahead and start looking into this timeline.component file. Actually, before we do that, let's get the header. If we open up something like text, we see this spdx header. We're just going to copy and paste that. And it is now 2021 out of the time of making this video. Okay, cool. So the first thing we need is to import component from Angular. Then we can start doing component things, and a component is going to need a selector, and the selector typically takes the convention of @view, then the name of the component, which is timeline. We have the template URL, which is going to be the HTML file, so timeline.component.html. And then we have the style URLs, which is going to be an array, and it's going to be timeline. Oops, this needs to be set a string because it's going to be a file path. Timeline, not component. Cool. And then besides that, we're also going to preemptively add the change detection strategy. and we'll make it on push. And this is kind of a, not necessarily best practice, but this just lets us know that we want to manually control change detection for Angular only when we send it new data and not have it do change detection by default. All right, now we export class timeline component. This extends the abstract view component because we have this component architecture that will essentially be a component factory, and then we'll do timeline view. And also this will implement on init. Cool, I'm pretty happy with that. Some of the stuff we read probably for linting, yeah. And we'll fix those at the end. And then experimental decorator does not implement from, okay, so we can fix that in a second. But let's get this constructor, and then now we'll have to figure out the other places where we'll need to fix imports in order to use timeline component. So the first thing we want to look for is dynamic components. Yeah, so this is the part where we want to make sure that our dynamic, our abstract view component, where we actually have the component factory to be able to find this component. So we want a timeline component. And cannot find name timeline component, and that's just because it's new. So we'll do import timeline component from presentation timeline and timeline.component. Cool, so now this is happy. And I guess while we're here, the other place that we'll also need to look is this shared.module file, and make sure that this is this module can actually have this timeline as an entry component, so we can use it in other modules. So we'll take the same line here, timeline component, over here, and we'll also need a timeline component over here. All right, and sanity checking this. Sure, let's fix this as a linter now, and I'm gonna move this somewhere more sane from this gigantic list of imports. Where's timestamp? There you are. There. Keep all the T's together. All right, that feels pretty good to me. Now we're back here, and this is still red. I suspect this might actually just be a Golang thing. I wonder what happens if I just make it redetect everything. Maybe because it's a new file. And hopefully it's better. All right, this. All right, so it partially, one of the updates went away. We can find out why. Oh yeah, it needs the update from class abstract view component, so that's why it's red. All right, so now we will add update then. Okay, and then it will go away. Update, and so before we update, we have to figure out, well, what variables do we want to update, right? So we'll leave this alone for now. Let's try to figure out what those update variables should be. So the first thing here we have is vertical. That's a Boolean, and then we also have steps. These are the timeline step. Great. And then I don't think we need anything else. So now we do const view equals this dot v. This dot vertical is going to be view.config.vertical. So now we take our views that's passed in app view timeline, and we actually start populating this component with the data. So we have vertical, and this dot steps is equal to view.config.steps. Cool. And I'm pretty happy with that. And let's see, more prettier fixes. Sure. Cool. So now we have all of this stuff. Guess we can fix these right now. All right, so now it's pretty and it's happy. So now we actually need to go into the HTML portion of this. I think content can go away now. And let's look back at this API documentation for clarity. We have the selector and basic usage, so we have this clarity timeline. So I think what we can do here is just steal this and throw it in our timeline. And we can go back here and look at this side by side with our timeline.component.typescript file. Cool. So first thing we'll actually want to figure out is vertical. So what does vertical mean? And here I think it's just clarity layout. So clarity layout equals vertical. And so this will tell us whether it's going to be horizontal or vertical. Or well, in this case, actually, it's going to be options horizontal or vertical. So we'll need to make sure that it's being passed in as if it's vertical is true, then we'll actually plug this in with the string horizontal, right? So something like vertical, and then we can do something like if vertical, I think there's like a very operator angular or no JS. So we're going to figure out if this is true, then we'll do, yeah, so something like this where it's question mark, then value, true value, false value. Cool. So we'll do the same thing. Vertical, and then we can do something like, or if vertical is true, then we do vertical. Then otherwise, it's going to be horizontal. Okay, and then the next thing is going to be the steps. It could be one or more steps. So we're going to need to throw a loop here. I believe this is going to be something like ng container is suitable. And then we'll do ng4, and then we'll do, close this for now. Sure. And what are our steps? Our steps are going to be the steps variable. So we'll do let step of steps. And then we'll also need a track by. And this is useful if only one thing, like if only one of the steps change, then this track by function helps Angular know that it only needs to replace that one thing and not the entire array. So we'll also need to implement the track by function here. And so the track by function is fairly straightforward. I think it's even copy and pastable from other parts of the code, but we do track by function, and I believe it's just keeping track of the index and then just return the index. This looks right to me, and might have prettier complaints, but overall this looks fine. Okay, so back to HTML. We have the track by function, and now we will take this and throw timeline step into the loop. And now this clarity state, if we look back in the API documentation here, this state is the current state, so we can use this as a way to set the string for not started current processing. So this lets Clarity know which icon to use. Cool. So this is going to be our step.state. And then we'll take the time to just uncomment the title and description now. Here we will also populate these with step.header and step.title, step.description. Nice. All right, so now both of these are taken care of. I think most of the CSS comes out of the box. We'll write the front-end spec in a different video. I think that'll be related to more related to the storybook type of work, where we start documenting this and we can think about what other tests are missing. So the thing I'd be interested in trying now is just to see if this thing actually just compiles, right? So go run build.go serve, and just make sure we didn't make any mistakes. And that's building. All right, so there are a few errors here. Unexpected token. So here we can try to figure out, well, what is the unexpected token? Let's see, unexpected token, identifier, keyword. NG4, let's steps to steps. Oh, there it is. We should not have a colon there. It should be a semicolon, and save. Maybe it's happier with me this time. Let's try this again. Cool. All right, so now it is successful, and we can actually start to think about how a user might consume this component. So a way to do this is to start thinking about the sample plugin, for example. If we go to main.go of the sample plugin, we can see here, like, this is in handle print, so I think this attaches itself to a pod, I believe, from the sample plugin. So we'll see if we can install the sample plugin and show the component on the screen. So let's go back to Go, and we'll start thinking about a timeline. Component.new timeline, and we can feed it a title. This is going to be title, and then we'll need steps here. Let's do that as a placeholder, and then we'll have vertical. This is going to be true. Yeah, and this will be our timeline. Let's define some steps. So steps, it's going to be a slice of steps, I believe. So it's going to be a series of steps that we can just write out. Component.timeline step. Yep. And then we can add like a couple of steps to work this through. State component.timeline step. Let's say not started. Header. Do like a header test. And then we can do a title. Let's do title test. Description, title, description. Cool, and we'll take our steps, feed them in here. And for science, let's also do like a timeline.add. And we can add one more step in here, like, or maybe two more. We can do something like a component.timeline step, and this could be something like state component.timeline current. And then we can add a header here as well. Current test title, current title. Sure. And then recall that this can take multiple steps, so we could even do something like, say, component.timeline step again, and do state component.timeline step. Let's do processing. That's a fun one. Header, loading, title, loading title, description, description. And then from here we can just toss it at the bottom of a plugin. So let's do with component with, let's do with full, and view. This is going to be the timeline view. Cool. So now we have this thing set up in a plugin. We could do go run build.go install test plugin, and this should hopefully just attach it to the right place. And then we'll serve our plugin again and see if this shows up in Octant. All right, it at least built successfully. Let's go to localhost 7777. And we see we have a sample plugin here. Oh, that's not quite right. We actually want to look at a pod. So this is a pod. So what do we have here? Print runner failed because under unknown view component timeline. Okay, so I see what's happening here. So this is a plugin sending the information back as bytes. So we actually forgot to update unmarshal.go. Yeah, so this is like a giant unmarshal for all components, and we need to add the timeline into this part here, and this should be fairly straightforward. Base metadata metadata dot wrap at json dot unmarshal, and then this is going to be dot config and t dot config. Very boilerplate. Unmarshal timeline config. Then equals t. And okay, now let's go back here. We'll exit out again. Let's recompile, and hopefully this fixes the problem. Phase building. Oh, right. Close this for now. Cool. And let's take a look again. Localhost 7777. And here we are back at another pod, and it should be at the bottom. Cool. So now we see this. We've got our header test and then title test and the current title, right? Appearing on screen. So I'm pretty happy with how this turned out of the box. We could make an argument for things like what happens if some of these fields are missing, right? Like what if header was blank or title was blank or description? Like how does this change? But overall, I think this is what we wanted. So yeah, that concludes video 2. Hope this was helpful, and have a nice day.